And I was sitting there eating, and my phone started buzzing, and what I saw was 11111 all the way across. And it was just like, it's got to be a joke.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Tracer Burn. I'm Dan.
And I'm Roger. And today, for the first time, we have two special guests inside of our studio.
That's right. For our Memorial Day episode this year, we have Gold Star mother, Amanda Ballard, and Gold Star brother, Elijah Sheek.
Stay tuned.
Amanda, Elijah, thanks for joining us.
Of course.
How are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Very hot.
It's only going to get hotter.
Yes. Spring is very short here in North Carolina.
Yeah, we have 4 seasons in 1 week.
Yeah,
that is
certainly accurate.
Well, thank you guys for sitting down and talking with us for our Memorial Day episode. We appreciate it. So, we get started the same way. Does your family have a history of service?
Yes.
Very large history of service.
Tell us about it.
Well, on my side, my dad's side, we have Army, Navy, Marine Corps. My dad was a 82nd Airborne. I guess y'all call them paratroopers or jumpers or whatever. Served a few years in Vietnam. Came back. He's got a brother, Lynn Bruce Jacobs, that was also 82nd Airborne Rangers, Special Forces, retired with, I want to say, 30 years, and very, still very active with the military and stuff, still lives in the area. Got uncles that served in the Navy, that did intelligence, cousins that were also in the Army. Have a cousin, her name's Tina. She went into the Army. She's a full-time nurse now, just a civilian nurse. And then, of course, my son, Jacob Levy, Lance Corporal Christopher Phoenix Jacob Levy, chose to become a Marine.
Why did he choose the Marines?
Wow, when you think back and just looking over it, 9/11 had just happened, and he had just turned 11 years old. I was pregnant with Elijah at the time, and I had to go and pick him up from school because he had a bloody nose, and the first tower had been hit. And by the time I left work and got him picked up, the other tower had been hit and fallen, and just so much was going on in the area that we were in Greensboro. You know, they got the big tank farm there, so they were shutting 40 down and everything, and people didn't know what was going on. You were seeing planes flying low, and it was just an overwhelming thing. And you've got your kids asking. Jacob was asking what was going on. His other brother, Payne, was asking, and so we just sat down and was watching the news. And, anybody that watched it then, that watches now, it was just very overwhelming because, again,
None of us had ever experienced anything like that.
None of that. And even stuff that we had heard about, when my dad spoke about Vietnam, I couldn't fathom that. It was, to me, that was like a movie. He's telling me about something. So sitting down with Jacob and his brother, and we're just watching it because it ran constantly on the news. And it was just like a light bulb went off in Jacob, when the Pentagon had been hit and people were trying to clean up debris. There was a Marine in his dress blues that was there cleaning stuff out. And I just remember Jacob going, "Look at that, Mama. They're not even supposed to get those uniforms dirty." And, look at him. He's digging through that. That's what I want to be. And I thought, okay,
Kids say the darndest things.
You need to think about some other branches of the service. Because I've heard a lot about Marines. I said, you're not, But he was only 11. And the more things happened with 9/11, and he really actually became obsessed. You're hearing all this stuff, it's a terrorist attack, who's behind it and everything. And then when it came out a little more of who was behind it, I just remember him telling me, Mom, I want to be a Marine. I want to be the one that's going to get the guy that did this to us. And at that point, in 2011, even at the age that I was, I had never experienced a war. The biggest war we had Pearl Harbor, we had Vietnam, but nothing that really affected home. And I just remember kind of laughing and telling him, I said, son, by the time you get old enough to join, this will be over because our president's going to go in and take care of business.
Shock and awe.
And again, he was 11. And when he graduated in 2009, he had already started the delayed entry program for the Marine Corps. And it was still that he's going to change his mind. He's going to want to do something else. But he was so into it. Anything that dealt with the military, and especially the Marine Corps, he was doing the research. Because I'm very big on that. If any of my boys want to do something, well, you do the research. You make sure you can defend it, right from wrong, what's the right thing. So he did it. He lived and just breathed Marine Corps. In middle school, he was in the ROTC, and it actually happened to be a Marine Corps base one. So
this is in Greensboro.
It was in Greensboro,
Okay.
the Amani charter school, and that was that really, the bug bit him. But unfortunately, when he went to high school, they had the Army ROTC, and he was just like, Mom, this is not the same. This is not. So I don't know of any other high schools, and I'm not moving, But, he went in there, he excelled in the ROTC, and I think a lot of it just had to do with because he was doing research on the military. He just wanted to know so much about it. And but again, the mom's perspective of it and being at home with the kids, he was this geeky, goofy kid. If he had a girlfriend and got into an argument, then it was like, Mom, I need you to talk to her. Or, Mom, tell her I don't want to go out with her. And I'm thinking, you're not going to make it in the Marine Corps. I'm going to tell you this.
Come on, I know some socially awkward Marines.
And it concerned me. And like I said, he did the delayed entry program when his recruiter came to speak with me. He was to be there at 6 o'clock. I left at 5:30 to go shopping because I was like, if he really wants him, he'll wait. Of course, when I came home at 6:45, the Marine was sitting there, the recruiter, and my son played it smart. He told him, if you want my mom, you have to be in your dress blues.
Well played, sir. Well played.
Very well played, because he was sitting there, and I was like, dang. So we talked, and, the conversation, he's a senior in high school. He's got a couple more months. And I've got Jacob on one side, and he's just like, I'm ready to go. And the recruiter's over here talking and everything. And, of course, his two brothers are all in the background, like, you don't want to go, don't leave us, and stuff like that.
Oh, the guilt trip, huh?
Yeah.
Yes, we were putting it on there thick. And, I'm listening to this recruiter try to convince me as a mom, well, he's going to do this. And, and Jacob's going, yeah, I'll get a $15,000 signing bonus. And I said, shh. And I looked at the recruiter. I said, now tell him the only way he gets the signing bonus is he's got to do XYZ. He's got to be able to come back. He doesn't get combat pay until he comes back from combat. And he, this guy's like, oh my gosh, she's calling me to the forefront. Mm-hmm. I said, because you need to be honest with it. And I said, because you have nothing invested in him. I've got 18, everything. Almost 19 years with him. I said, and you're just trying to get a paycheck. And, I could see the color wash from Jacob's face, like, Mom, don't be, that's wrong. I'm like, you're in my house. You're trying to take my son. And I remember the recruiter saying, you've raised a fine young man. Let us make him into a great young man. And I thought, oh.
Got him.
And
got him.
Where Jacob worked at the time at Sears at the mall, the recruiting office was right around the corner. Mm-hmm. And because he was in the delayed entry program, the recruiter kept track of him to make sure his grades were on par and stuff. So I just remember looking at the recruiter and I said, okay, he'll be 18 in so many days. I said, for the next 2 weeks, you don't go to his job, you don't go to his school. If he comes into that recruiting office, you tell him to leave. I said, and if he still wants to, I'll come down and sign the papers. Knowing at 18, I didn't have to be there to sign the papers, but Jacob didn't know. If Mama wasn't happy, nobody was going to be happy.
He trusted his mom.
Exactly. And because during that 2 weeks, I called anybody and everybody that I could that had seen combat, that had, just they knew what it was about. They had back injuries and they were suffering, because I wanted him to talk to them. I wanted him to know the reality. And it wasn't just Marines. I called people that I knew that served in the military. I had him to sit down with my uncle. Tell him about, if this happens, the bodies you had to drag across, what he's going to see. Because for 18 years, he's been in the confines of home. Mama's going to protect him. He's safe here, If he was sick, all he had to do was pick up the phone and Mom could come pick him
running.
up. You're in another country, you get sick. I can't write you a note to excuse you, from school. This is it. He needed to understand.
Sick call.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If you had written him a note and sent it to him, it would not have gone over well.
No, it wouldn't.
I mean, it would have been funny.
Exactly. So after 2 weeks, it seemed like it was 2 minutes. 2 weeks to the day, the time. Mom, let's go. We got to go sign the papers. We went down there and we were getting everything together and he signed the papers. He's like, well, here, Mom, go ahead and sign. I said, Jacob, I said, something I need to tell you. And he was like, what? I said, I didn't have to come and sign. I said, you're 18. I said, by law, you're an adult. You can sign whatever contract you wanted to. And he was like, and the recruiter's looking at him. I said, that's what I want you to understand as far as what power I have over him. I said, and he needs to know. And the recruiter says, I respect that. And, he was scheduled to leave in June. And he had that 1 week, and we had planned to just do a family trip because we knew he'd be gone for 13 weeks. And he was actually down in Robeson County visiting some family members, and he gets a call, and he calls me. He said, Mom, Gunny Wilson just called. I said, okay. He says, he wants me to leave tomorrow.
Welcome to the Marine Corps.
I said, what do you mean leave tomorrow? I said, we have paid for a trip next week. We are going on vacation. But Mom, he wants me to go now. What's his number? So here's where it wasn't a note, but it was a telephone call. And
Talk to Mom.
I called Gunny Wilson and I said, I understand that you want Jacob to leave on the bus tomorrow. I said, one, it's Father's Day weekend. I said, we've got a family trip planned and I need to do this. And he was like, well, ma'am, he said, technically he was ready to go 6 months ago. But because he hadn't graduated, we couldn't just let him go. And, this would be the perfect time for him to go in. And he said, in reality, he really doesn't need your permission. He's 18. And I remember having this conversation with this Gunny. I said, you're right. I said, but reality, Jacob won't go anywhere unless I'm okay with it. So here we were at this impasse with this Gunny and stuff. I said, I tell you what, I said, let me have a conversation with Jacob and we'll decide. And it was when having that conversation with Jacob, he was like, Mom, I am ready. And I said, but Jacob, I said, I just want you to be fully aware of what you're getting ready to do. I said, your boss, I said, I'm a firm believer. If I don't like my boss, I'm not going to work for him. And I said, why would you want to go in and work for someone you didn't vote for and you had no respect for? I said, I don't get it. And this is when I realized that my little son, my firstborn, had went into this whole new phase of, I know what I'm doing. I'm smart. I can handle this. And his response was, he says, Mom, it's not about the black man in that White House. It's about the woman and the 2 little boys in this yellow house here and everybody else that doesn't have a voice.
You raised a good boy.
And it was just, as a mom, it was like, oh, but I was proud of it. And I said, all right. I said, well, you need to call your dad and tell him you're leaving on Father's Day. And, he did. And he got on that bus and, it was just this whole different, what I saw. And I'm looking at him walking into his next chapter journey in life, and then I'm looking back at his 2 brothers who are just, they're crying and they're like, what are we going to do? What if he doesn't come back? And at the time Elijah was like, what, 6, 7 years old?
Yeah, I was just in that stage of elementary school where years were transitioning from one grade to the next, so it was somewhere between 6 and 7, and sitting there just looking at him kind of just like walk away, it bothered me to the point where like I didn't go to sleep for I don't know how long. I would always go into their room and be like, is he okay? Try to figure out something, because I've never spent my life without him.
Right.
At least a phone call away,
Yeah.
And now he's just gone for months on end. And when we got the call, like the graduation call, I mean, we went there. I remember Paris Island, hot, muggy, miserable. But the thing that made us realize, like, it wasn't even about the weather. We were just happy to be there. And we got to see him, and we picked him out from the crowd because we knew exactly who he was, where he was, everything. And when we were able to see him, we finally, everybody just grabbed him, held him, and right there, I knew it was still my brother, but it was a whole different version of my brother I've never seen before.
Yeah, of course.
And I was proud. I was like, dang, that's a whole different transformation from the brother I seen back home, who was, making sure everything was perfect, and now he has to be perfect in a sense.
Yeah. It's like the heavens opened up for him when he saw Jacob come through with that uniform. It was like,
he's not a goofy teenager anymore.
Exactly.
He's a Marine.
And I was like, can we still joke around? Like.
Well, here's a little secret. They're still goofy teenagers. They just
yeah.
They just look sharp in the dress uniform.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the crazy part was during that whole time staying down there for that like family weekend or whatever, we got to be around and see the barracks and stuff like that. And I was like, dang, I was like, you gave up, your bed for this? Just first thing I thought of, I was like, wow, this is crazy. And then, the guys there, like you said, goofy teenagers still, and some of them, even they're adults, are still goofy as all get out.
It's very true.
And there was one of them popped out. They were like, hey, man, you want to get drunk talking to me? And my dad was like, excuse me? He's like, first off, I'm just playing. He's like, we just got Gatorade because it's hot. He's like, you're more than welcome to get some, and brought out this cooler for us and was giving us stuff. And Jacob was like, don't do that again, man, and just just talking to him. But yeah, throughout the couple years of going back to school and people seeing my shirt saying I'm the brother of a United States Marine and having his 3/8 on the back, people was asking me like, oh, that's cool, explain, and I was like, telling them about it. And remember, I think it was my 3rd grade year, we had career day. Well, my dad was flying in and out of town for his engineering job, so I couldn't get him to come. And people said that there was going to be state troopers there, stuff like that. They needed a military person. I was like, well, I don't know if my brother's even home and able to do it. And I told Mom about it, and the next day, for career day, my brother walks in the door. And he's in his uniform, and to this day, my friends who went to elementary school with me still talk about it to this day.
Quite an impression.
Yeah, and they were like, that was probably the coolest thing they ever seen, because it really brought the military close to home, because they were like, all we seen is recruiters. We didn't know, like, your brother would show up, and I was like, I didn't know he would show up. I didn't know he was even around. I thought he was still at Camp Lejeune at the time, so I was like, okay. And so during that whole thing, I think it was the between 4th and 5th grade. I think it was 4th grade. We're sitting there, and I mean, that, you know, the front office calls into your classroom, asks for you. You know, you did something wrong, and I was like, I've been a good boy. I'm in the green in school. I'm in the green zones, and my teacher, I kind of saw my teacher kind of drop her head. She turned and looked at me, and I was like, I'm either in trouble or somebody just got hurt in my family. And first thing I thought of was, well, my brother's okay. He's cool. Because my brother was down the road in the high school already. He was a freshman, I believe, at the time. And then mom's at work, dad's at work. So they tell me that I need to come to the front office. And this is kind of where I feel like reality was starting to set in.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, like I said, I was 9 at the time. And so he came back home prior to this, and then he volunteered to go back with the 1-6. And, you know, he was very excited to go back. I mean, you couldn't tell him nothing. You know, volunteering to go back, I was like, is he still getting paid if he volunteers to go back? Because then, that's the first thing I thought of. Every time I hear volunteering, it's free work. But, as a 9-year-old, you don't think anything's going to happen to you or happen to your family or things along that nature.
Young men tend to think they're invincible, right?
Yeah. Well, and, you know, like he was, you know, leading into, it's just like he's with the 3/8, and, well, you guys know, you come home to visit, so you bring in the guys home with it. And where we lived at the time, it was easy for the guys, if they were on a 96 leave, we were going to go to Levy's house because we can get there and get back and not be, you know, late. And so that's where these two would find out how many extra brothers they would have.
Yeah, for sure.
Because, you know, they would call, or Jacob would text, hey, we got some leave, so me, so-and-so and so-and-so is coming. All right, well, that means I got to go to Costco.
And coming home from school, and seeing 20 other Marines that ain't your brother just there, you're just like...
Or, you know, and it was funny because, you know, like I said, they'd get there, and it was just... It made me feel good because here's Elijah and Payne, and they're seeing these guys, and these guys are roughhousing with them, and, you know, they're...
Roughhousing?
Yeah,
The hell you say?
That's like, good thing when you lived out in the country, so they could. You need to take this outside before you break my furniture.
Can't hear the screams through the trees.
But, you know, at that time, you know, my thought process is, okay, he's got him some good buddies and stuff. I did not know it was preparing me for anything else down the road. And then it would be, well, Jacob didn't have leave, but so-and-so had leave. Could they come up to the house without Jacob? I'm like, well, sure, you know where the key's at. So or they'd go and pick Payne and Elijah up from school, and then the next thing we know, you know, he's going on his, what I call, or what they were calling their muse to get their sea legs and stuff. Yep. And so they went, and he was, you know, texting me or emailing me all this stuff that they wanted to see, going through Kenya, they're doing this, and he was sending all these pictures by email. I was like, oh my gosh, I would have never been able to send you to places like that. And then all of a sudden, I get this quick email, Mom, we're going into combat.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? He says, yeah, they're taking us into Pakistan, Afghanistan area. And I said, what's going on? He's like, well, which... He couldn't tell me anything, but at the same time, you're watching the news, and this is when they, you know, were honing in on Bin Laden. And I was just like, okay.
So what year is this? So this we can kind of vector this in here.
2011.
11, okay.
And it's just like, you know, this was May or...
Yeah, May of 2011.
They went, I'm trying to think, the latter part of December, they started doing their little things, and they were going through everything, and I knew he was going to do some training some places, and so now we're in, like, gosh, I'm trying to think, because it was May 2nd when Bin Laden was killed. May 2nd,
yeah, it was May 2nd when he was,
mercy me.
When it came to the news.
Somewhere in May.
Okay.
Because
my memory, it all blurs together.
Yeah, it blurs together after a point. And, you know, so you're seeing everything on the news of what everybody's saying, where they think he's at, and they're, you know, SEALs and stuff like that. I'm just like, you know, he said that every once in a while I'd get a message from Jacob, don't watch the news. Just stay away from the news.
That's
Okay.
generally a good idea.
Yeah.
And he sent me one, don't post anything about where I'm at or what we're doing. Okay. All right. Or you got someone watching me? Because I'm like, I don't know. So, but again, you can't help but to watch the news because you want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And, and all of a sudden I just remember, watching the news and you got Obama and Biden, all of them in their little room and everything. And, Bin Laden's dead.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, where's Jacob at? What's going on? Because again, you don't know. And being the mom that I was, I had to know, even to this day, where you going to be at? Let me know where you're at. And it was like around 10:30 or so that night when it was on the news. Well, about 10 minutes later, my phone rings. And I look and I'm like, that's Jacob. And I answer. He said, Mama, we're coming home. I'm like, you coming home? I said, Bin Laden's dead. And he's like, I know. And I was trying to tell him, I said, the code name was Geronimo and stuff. He's like, I know. I said, what happened? I can't say anything about it. Well, were you there? Mama, I can't talk about it. I just want to let you know we're coming home. I'm like, again.
Give me something.
Give me something. I want to be able to say something. So that's all I've got time for. Love you, bye. And it was just like the anxiety of, you're watching the news. Do you believe what the news is telling you, or do I believe someone that's calling? So he came home Mother's Day, 2011, at Camp Lejeune.
They timed that just right. There you go.
Perfect. We're there. We've got signs. He's supposed to be there at 9 o'clock. Then we get a message. It'd be 10 o'clock.
It's a military tradition to
It's
string
just
these things
coming.
out. Yes.
It's that hurry up and wait.
Yes.
And we've made signs
very much
and
so.
everything for the 3/8 to come home, and we're standing there. And some of the funniest things is, at that point, he's not old enough to drink, but he's old enough to go off and kill somebody.
That's how that works.
And
Yep.
it's,
Yep.
irritate. But again, my son, Jacob, to me, never did anything wrong.
Of course not.
Wouldn't do anything bad. Wouldn't do anything, what's supposed to. So they're getting off the bus, and here he comes, and I see him. He's got a beer in one hand, and he had just taken a big drag off of a cigarette.
Yeah.
And I said, Jacob! And all he could do is, here's the smoke coming out.
I'm holding it for a friend.
That's basically. And he's got this beer in his hand. I'm like,
It's
and
not
all
mine,
of a
I
sudden
swear.
he just goes, and his brothers are looking at him like, ooh, you in trouble now. You're not supposed to be drinking. But I didn't care because I'm thinking, I don't know what you've been doing. I don't know what.
But you're home.
But
Just
you're
glad
home.
you're home. Yeah.
Drink it, I'll go buy you another one. It doesn't matter.
You need it.
And
Yeah.
so, he's ready to go home. I said, do you need to go? He said, nope. All I got to do is put my stuff in the car. Let's go. I don't want to stop. But here he is. I'm thinking he's going to love this air conditioning in the van because he hasn't been anywhere with his air conditioning. No, we had to roll the windows down because he
stunk.
smelled that bad. So now I know why the only reason he needed wipes. He was just really wiping his face and stuff in his hands.
We literally call that Marine showers in the Army. When you're just baby wipes. Yes.
Yep.
That's a thing.
So
Dude
I was
wipes
like,
are awesome.
Yes,
we're
they
going to
are. Yes, they
ride
are.
3.5 hours with the windows down. We got our 260 air going because I can't, I could not stand the
It's
smell.
stifling.
Yeah, so I'm getting him home, and I was like, leave your clothes out here, take off whatever you need to out here, and go take a shower. And
You're spraying them on the back
yes,
porch.
exactly. And, they were excited. It's like we're standing outside the bathroom, like, come on out. We just want to hug you because, I wanted to put my hands on him. I just needed to, make sure there wasn't any extra holes and things like that. And, it was Mother's Day.
Yes, it was.
The best Mother's Day I could, ever get. And, of course, I took him to my mom's, and we went out to dinner and all this stuff. And I had his room ready, and we just had, that day was just big. And I remember, they were trying to keep up with him and stay up with him all night, just because we had not seen him in so long. And I was like, let him go to sleep. Let him get on his bed and, sleep.
Jet lag is a real
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Plus and Dan knows it's that adrenaline
Yeah.
dump. It'll knock you out.
Yes, and I just remember I said,
Yeah.
Being a mom, you get up in the middle of the night, you got to check on your kids, and I went and checked on Elijah in pain, and I walked into Jacob's room, and I was like, the bed's still made. I'm thinking, well, maybe he's gone outside I go outside, I don't see him anywhere. I'm back walking through the house, I'm like, where is he at? I'll go back into his room, and I go around the bed, and he's on the floor wrapped up in a blanket. And I'm like, you don't wake up a combat veteran. I'm just going to leave him there. We'll talk about it when he gets up. So when he got up the next morning, we're eating, and I said, why were you sleeping on the floor? I said, I spent all that time getting your bed ready, clean sheets and everything. Why didn't you sleep in the bed? He said, Mom, he says, I just wasn't ready. He said, but understand, he said, I have slept in worse places than my bedroom floor. That crushed me. Because all my life, my parents always told me, we worked hard so you wouldn't have to work hard, so you'd have a better job. And, that reality set in, all the stuff that I've done, how hard I worked, the things, the privileges and, things that I've been able to give you was not for you to think that the best that you could do was sleeping on the ground or somewhere. And it was just like, ooh, I don't have a little boy anymore.
Yeah.
And, it scared me all kinds of ways. And his relationship, Elijah still being young the way he was and just like reaching at him, and he kept pushing Elijah away for a while. Elijah didn't understand that, and I didn't understand it, but I had to pull him to the side. I said, what's going on? And again, to find out that a choice he had to make between him and his guys surviving or shooting a kid that was strapped with a bomb that was the same age as his brother.
Yeah.
That really, affected him.
When did he tell you about that experience?
He was he had been home for leave for like 2 weeks and he went back. So he had been back, I guess you'd say, stateside for about a month and a half. And that's, like I said, that's when I was noticing, anytime Elijah was like very excited and wanting home, he would just,
Yeah, that.
Do you have memories of this?
Yeah, that kills me even to this day. Being 23, to think about it still kills me. When he came home and everything and got to stay, I would watch him, play Call of Duty or like Assassin's Creed and things along that nature, and I would sit next to him and I would see him kind of like move away from me. And the closer I got, the further away he got.
Yeah.
And then there was one time my brother Payne and him, they were hanging out, and whenever I would walk up, he'd walk away. And I was like, what did I do? And there was a time where I went to, my dad, and I just cried. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I was like, I'm excited to see him too. Does he not want to see me? And Dad was like, well, I just got home. I don't know what's going on, but if I see it, I'll address it and see what's going on and figure something out,
Yeah.
And I think Dad kind of already knew like it had to be something that happened to him or he's seen. And there was, I went to try to give him a hug, and instead of hugging me back, he kind of put his arm down and like extended his arm on me, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm kind of pushed out now. And I sat in my room and I cried. I mean, like I said, I'm 8, 9 years old at this time, and I mean that hurts. Your brother just came back home and you haven't seen him in months. You want to see him,
Yeah.
but you don't want to hang out with
And
him.
how could you understand, right?
Yeah, and it's like,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know nothing. And Mama came into my bedroom and saw me. I was upset and everything. And I told her, I was like, I'm not sure if Jacob loves me anymore. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I was like, I'm not trying to just run up on him because I know he's probably scared of something, but I just don't want to feel like this.
Yeah.
And so that's when she took him off to the side and said, look, because I heard the conversation, basically telling him, like, look, you're home, you're safe, even when you don't feel like it. Nobody's going to hurt you in this house. And, like, that's your baby brother. It's nobody else's, it's yours. And he came in there and was like, look, I love you. Don't ever think I don't love you. And he gave me a hug, and I could feel him, like, it was one of those hugs where I could feel the love, but I could feel him, like, starting to shake. And it broke my heart. That's the only way I can explain it. It killed me. And to this day, even being 23, sometimes I get to thinking about it, like, was it really that, or did I do something wrong? It's still one of those moments in my head because I just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And at the time, I wish I could have understood better of how to approach him at the time. But being a little kid,
You're a
being
kid,
excited,
but it's
It's hard enough for adults to know how to handle it, let alone a small child.
Yeah, and, I mean, like I said, my big brother, ain't seen him in months on months on months on end, and I finally get to see him, and I get pushed away.
Do you know how long was he downrange for that one?
They were, because let's see, this was when they left for their muse. It was like the end of March. So, whatever, like I said, it was like mid-April when they said they were going into combat. So I'm thinking, well, you got to travel, you got to do this. So I don't know. So by the time everything happened, and again, they were back home Mother's Day of 2011. And, again, just watching the dynamics between all three of them, whereas Payne was a little bit older and knew how to play the Call of Duty, so they were gravitating a little more. And Payne, I always tell people he's the silent one. He's like, I ain't gonna ask no questions. I don't know. I don't have to.
And he's older than you?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, but there was still a difference in dynamics there because it seemed like Jacob was trying to get Payne to understand. Look, you got to help Mom out. You're going to have to help Mom out with, Elijah for him to understand. I can't get him to understand because, because you see those dynamics happening. He's trying to pass down, I need your help with our baby brother.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't understand and I don't know how to explain it. And so they did have a good working dynamics. And once I realized what was going on, I could explain to Elijah.
Yeah.
But during that time, he's home. He gets to come home on the weekends. And I'm still seeing my son. I said, he's changed. He's not this. And he kept telling me, he said, I hate being at base and just doing maneuvers all the time. He says, there's guys over there that's still there that they need me. And I'm like, well, it's not your time. I said, y'all are, because at this point they knew that the 3/8s were supposed to go back in February of 2012.
On a MEU?
I think so, yeah.
So let me define a couple of things for people that are listening. So a MEU is a Marine Expeditionary Unit. Mm-hmm. It's when they call it going on a float sometimes. It's when they're with the Navy. So the Navy, obviously, maritime activities going all over the world. So these are
Marine Corps Uber.
Right. So these are, well, that's what Marine stands for. It's my ass rides and Navy equipment.
Yeah.
Sir.
Exactly.
So the Navy will go on a float, and so the MEU will go with them. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes when they're deploying into combat zones, they're doing it, we'll say, from the MEU, meaning they're already at sea, out and about, and then they just kind of float over to go handle business.
That's already there.
Yeah, very different from the Army, which is much more deliberate. We have because there's so much more equipment and it's a huge lift. So I just wanted to kind of set that up for the people listening. So his first deployment, it was from the MEU,
right?
And it looks like we're about to discuss the next one here. So that's correct. From the MEU as well. I guess at this point, I'm assuming, was he infantry?
Yeah, he was infantry with the weapons company,
okay.
3/8. So again, he just always said he liked blowing up stuff.
Yeah, I kind of assumed that. But,
blowing up stuff is fun.
It's fun.
Yes, that's
when done right.
If done right. So again, like I said, he's pretty much home for the summer, and we're doing our typical. We're going to our Native American festivals, dancing. He's getting the opportunity to just really get out there and dance and stuff. And we went to Lumbee Homecoming, which was down in Pembroke during the 4th of July. And this is when reality hit me about maybe it's not a great idea to have a bunch of fireworks around combat vets.
Yeah.
Because, we celebrate everything with fireworks, it seems like. And we just happened to be at Lumbee Homecoming. It was the night they were getting ready to start.
It's a good party, too. I've been. It's a good party.
It's a good party. And it was like, we're sitting there. We've had a great evening. Some of his buddies had been there, and, they're off, as they were saying, y'all got some beautiful women down here. It's like, yeah. So, but we're staying at such and such hotel. That's where you need to come back to for a night.
And they have the best accents, too.
And, yeah. And it started, and all of a sudden, I just remember looking over at Jacob. And it looked like he had just closed himself in to a shell. And he said, Mama, you got to get me out of here.
Yeah.
And I just said, all right, let's go. And I, grabbed him. I said, just hold on to me. The car's XYZ. I'll get you in the car. We'll get out of here. And it was the look of, he was terrified. And this was something that, we did fireworks for years, 4th of July celebrations and stuff like that. And, he always enjoyed it. This was all of a sudden an experience that I wasn't ready for. I didn't know how to.
Yeah.
And he didn't know how to explain it to me. And, the next day we were talking about it, and he was like, Mom, he said, just hearing it, where I was at, the sounds that I would hear, and, bullets, and it's like, oh my gosh. And so they all went back to Camp Lejeune, and then it had been a couple of weeks, and he comes back and he says, hey, I might have an opportunity to go back over. And I was like, oh, so you and Carlos and Nathan, all y'all, your group's going back? And he's like, no, he says, it's not in stone yet, but, they're looking they need some replacements over there. And I was like, well, I said, don't go rushing into anything. You need to decompress from this deployment, wait your turn. And he was like, well, I'm just, thinking about it. And then, of course, he comes back another weekend. He's like, oh, well, the 1-6, they need some combat replacements. And I was like, okay. And he's like, I'm thinking about going. I was like, why? And it comes out, he said, well, Mom, they're a patch. It's an Indian head. It's a skull with the Indian headdress on it and everything.
My hands are tied.
Yeah. He says, and
try to sweet talk his way into it.
He says, and I'm native and stuff. Jacob, that is not a reason to go with somebody. And he was like, I'm just thinking about it. Well, again, what was Mom going to do?
Yeah.
They told him he needed to go, and it's an opportunity. And, of course, he was always quick to say, well, I'm going to get this much in combat payment.
Yeah.
Again, you got to come back to spend it. Or he would joke around, well, Mom, if something happens, you won't ever have to work again. Trust me, I'd rather, work the rest of my life than anything happen to you. Well, he did volunteer to go back as combat replacements for the 1-6 Weapons Company. They left.
Which is out of Lejeune as well.
Out of Lejeune, yeah.
So before we get to that, I have a couple questions. So y'all are Lumbee.
Right.
Has there ever been any, I'm going to ask two questions. One is going to be Lumbee, and then it's going to be much more generalized to Native Americans. Has there ever been any tension with the fact that, particularly, you've had several men in your family have served. Is there any tension with military service and the Lumbee Nation, just in general?
No, and I think a lot of that's got to do with the mindset, like with my dad, my uncle, and even Jacob and my cousins, all of them that went in. The mindset that they had was, as Native, we fought and died for this country before it was ever a country.
Sure, of course.
Blood runs deep and, the dirt everywhere you go. And so being extremely connected and talk about wanting to protect your home, that gave them all that sense.
Of course.
And you think about the Navajo code talkers.
Right.
All that, as far as Lumbee, I think a lot of the military and what I have seen in the military, I think the military really respects the Native American community.
There's much better integration.
Right.
I'll say on the East Coast. I mean, that's still kind of a generalization, but
right. And you want that, and I think with that sense of groundness or thinking, you want to protect your homeland, and again, the blood runs deep. I mean, I could probably go to Robeson County and you start doing a lot more history, and you think about the Lowry Wars and stuff, Henry Berry Lowry and all that, and they were fighting for the freedoms of Native people then, and it just keeps. And I think that's what Jacob was saying. I'm not just fighting for me. It's not I want to go out there. I want to defend what our ancestors have been trying to do for years, and to make it a better place and make it safe. And so just through the reality, when we have our powwows and cultural events, the first thing we do is we do our traditional anthem. It's a flag song. And we honor every veteran, whether they're Native or not. We bring them out because, not only are we defending what we had before you came here, you're now here and y'all have helped defend what our ancestors had for so many years. And I just see that as a different...
Yeah. I love the way you put that. Yeah.
The military is a completely different aspect. And that's what I learned when Jacob went on this last deployment. It was just, we're there and, he's over there. We had a little conversations back and forth, texting and stuff. And I remember sending him a email that I wanted to take the uniforms that he had that he couldn't wear anymore, and I wanted to use them to do a design for my new regalia. I wanted to cut them up, and this is what I was putting in the email. Now, mind you, I'm working for the state of North Carolina, so our emails are watched anyway. Little did I know that the government was also watching his emails and my email, because before he could respond, I get an email from the government that says that I could not destroy or do anything to a commissioned military person. I can't remember the wordings. Uniforms. I was like, what? And then all of a sudden Jacob emails me. He said, Mom, you can't cut up my uniforms as long as I'm active and stuff. I was like, oh, okay, well, let's just get off these, state government things, because Big Brother's watching, it kind of, it wigged me out, So, I just left it alone, and again, a lot of emails back and forth telling us what he was doing. I get a call from him, and I can hear noise in the background. It's like, and I'm like, where are you at? He says, oh, right now, I'm up under a Humvee. There's a lot of bullets flying. I said, what? He said, well, we managed to find a satellite phone, so I just figured I'd call you home. Hang up the phone, Jacob. Do not call. You need to be paying attention.
Focus, son, focus.
Exactly. So that's where the goofiness and, the teenage...
This would be a great time to call Mom.
Yeah, let's call Mom. Let's tell. And I'm like...
Because that's what she needs in her life.
It's like, you know what would really make this day go by good? Hey, Mom, how you doing?
Let her hear the bullets flying.
Well, at least he didn't call collect from Antarctica, which we've had one of those on the show.
Oh, my gosh. So, of course, he hangs up and everything. And, this is October going into November. And,
Okay, so he had come home.
Yes.
Mother's Day of 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And when he obviously volunteered to go back with 1-6, when did he leave again?
October the 7th of 2011.
Yep.
So that was a really short.
That's a quick term.
Only a few months.
Quick, yeah. And again, his mentality was he couldn't function at Camp Lejeune just doing routine stuff.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that, and then we'll take a quick break, and then we'll get into the next deployment. Dan and I have discussed this before, but it's something that only people who've been in real, true combat will ever really understand, how you can experience something that traumatic and come home, and it's a huge paradox that you're so relieved to be home, and yet the only thing in the world you want to do is go back.
Exactly.
Half of you is here, half of you is still over there.
Yes, and it's almost impossible to explain.
Yeah.
You got anything on that point? I mean,
no.
And I couldn't, at that point with that, what could I say? Because I didn't understand, like, why would you want, as a mom, well, you're home, you're safe, leave it alone, chill.
Well, part of it is that, you spend so much time training and preparing to do your job.
To do a job.
Yeah. So you go and you do it for however long, and then you come back and you're not doing that job anymore that you've spent all this time preparing to do.
The mission.
You're cutting grass.
The way that your focus is, it's now I'm not doing my job anymore.
Yeah.
And he's this 20-year-old kid,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I gotta have it,
I think there's one song that I've heard that describes it so perfectly, and it's Joe Bachman. He sung that song called Soldier's Memoir, and he explains it so good. He has a amputee on there. I can't remember his name, but then there's another guy who was in the Army. The first guy was in the Marine Corps, and they sit there and share their stories during the song. Then as he's singing it, he's talking about coming back home. He was like, part of me is here at home, but part of me's still there. And he's talking about, and the story, you can hear the story, you can hear the pain in his voice singing.
Yeah.
Talking about, I can still taste the powder from my gun.
Yeah.
I can feel the weight of the backpack. It feels like it weighs
Smells.
a ton.
Yeah.
He's like, it just feels like it weighs a ton. And I'm like, listen to that song, I'm only imagining what my brother and other family members of other people have gone through and can just still smell the powder or smell the dirt and just of everything. And as a Gold Star family member, that bothers me. But then me going and at least being in National Guard for as long as 2 years, I believe, at max, just being there and being around the people, like being trained by people who was there, I saw it. And before I left, due to my medical stuff, I told Drill Sergeant Taupow, I said, look, no matter how much you hate me right now because you're a drill sergeant or whatever, and he gave me a handshake, and I was like, I appreciate everything you and everybody have done overseas. And he already saw my profile. He saw that my brother was killed overseas and stuff like that. And he was like, yeah, but your brother's probably the biggest man that we know right now. He's like, people like that are like top tier.
Yeah.
And that it broke me because I'm like, but you have to live with it. I was like, my brother's a better place, but you have to sit here and live with it. I was like, and that's probably the strongest thing I've ever seen anybody do, is go through stuff like that, but yet still push through their day and make it through. And it just,
there's
it's
some
a whole
things
nother battle.
There's some things you never get over.
Yeah. So it's just a whole different battle.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about a second deployment.
So he was only home for a few months, and then he volunteered to go back to Afghanistan.
Correct. We dropped him off at Camp Lejeune on October the 7th.
Yeah, we actually took the last picture that we all had, and my brother Payne, he always thought he was the cool guy, so he always had his arms, folded up, and then I was able to, hug him at least one time, and he just stood there just because
typical Marine, just like.
Had he warmed up too a little bit?
Yeah, so by that time
okay.
I could actually get close to him, and he would actually like grab me and play around, and he finally was able to mentally come to the fact that it's okay. You're my baby brother.
Yeah.
You're not an enemy. You're not going to hurt me. Things along that nature. And I remember before that, I failed and I said, ow. And I could see like something going on with him. And I was like, I'm fine. I stumbled, stubbed my toe. It's fine. And he was like, okay. So I guess after that, he really started warming up, just slowly but surely, and which made me feel good about it. I was like, okay, getting closer. And then, like she said, he had to drop him off one last time, and then that's the where I was talking about earlier about being in elementary school.
And, that was kind of like a tradition for me. All their pictures, they'd have their school pictures, but then at the same time, I'd make sure they had a group picture as they were growing. It was just, seeing. So that one picture was the last picture of the three of them together. And, Jacob standing there like, well, your mom's taking pictures again. And he's holding on to Jacob like for dear life, and Payne's over there like, can we go, and we're still trying to make arrangements because, now his car is at Camp Lejeune, and he's telling me, here's the extra key, I'll put all my other stuff in there, you come down and get my car, take it home. I was like, okay. And, it's just little things like that you're not really thinking about future-wise stuff. It's just like, okay, we got this little stuff, we'll have it taken care of. And, we got in the car and left, and, just typical everyday life. And, like I said, he let us know that he was in Germany when they got there, and he said, well, I hadn't been able to sleep, so I'm going to get me a couple of shots and maybe I can sleep the rest of the way over. I was like, okay, and I could hear his buddies in the background, yeah, we got 4-beer Betty here. He'll be out before, So I'm like, okay.
Think of the money you save that way, though.
Exactly. He doesn't, and I would, when I look back over things, I'd see him make posts where he was holding up all these beers and liquors and stuff, and I'm thinking, but you'd always, your guys would tell you be out before anybody else would. And again, I knew he was gone, and I just told him, I said, whatever you have to do, don't worry about who's sitting at the desk on this side. You do whatever you have to do to come back home. We'll deal, with whatever the consequences are when you come back.
Yep.
As they always said, it's easier to, get forgiveness than it is permission, and that's that was the philosophy. And again, we had our little emails back and forth with each other, and I was at work, and I get a call on my cell phone, and it was November the 14th. And he's like, can't talk long, I just want to tell you we're getting ready to go into a hot spot, so I won't be able to email or call for a couple of weeks. And I said, okay. I said, what's going on? He says, it's just really bad over here, Mom. He says, but just tell everybody to send beef jerky, underwear, and tell everybody I love them. I can do that, and of course, like I said, I was still working for the state of North Carolina, so it was real easy because Jacob was what we always called a clerk baby. When I started in the clerk's office, he was part of the office. Everybody knew him, so to get care packages to send over wasn't a problem, and we all knew that if you sent for one, you better send enough for, 100. And we'd send these packages, and that's what we just automatically started doing, getting everything together to send. And we just was like, okay, we're good. Stay away from the news. Don't listen to anything.
Yeah. Do you know approximately where they were operating?
Yeah, Kajaki, Afghanistan, and the Helmand province.
Helmand, okay.
Yeah,
I kind of figured. Okay.
And I can never pronounce it right, but Sangjin Valley. Mm-hmm. But it was there in the Helmand province. And so, like I said, this is November the 14th. I was kind of really hoping he was calling to say that he was coming back home and he'd be home for Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever, but that wasn't it. And so I just put myself in that mode. We're going to work. I'll work all the time. Stay busy. Yeah. Don't look at the news. Because even during that time, there was a lot of people getting killed. The death rate and stuff was, you were always hearing on the news that another soldier or Marine had been killed. And it was like, gosh, I don't know what these people are going through. I'd hate for something like that to happen. And it was December the 7th. I was at work, had just left to go to lunch. And was sitting in the restaurant, and they had told us all this stuff, that if something ever happens, we'll get like an emergency code across our phone, and then someone would call. And I was sitting there eating, and my phone started buzzing, and what I saw was 11111 all the way across. And it was just like, it's got to be a joke. And then just a couple of seconds later, the phone rang. And I answered the phone, and like I said, I'm sitting in a restaurant, and I hear the person on the other phone ask for me, and I said, "This is she," and they were like, "This is Master Sergeant Lewis. Where are you at?" I said, "Well, I'm at work in High Point," and he said, "Well, there's been an incident with Lance Corporal Levy. We need you to make your way home." And of course, just like, his first point, "What happened? What's going on?" "Ma'am, we need you to come home." Well, at this point,
Does your mind go there?
It goes automatic straight to there. I'm sitting at lunch with his dad, and I'm like, I gotta go home.
And at this point, I'm in elementary school.
Yeah. And
you're in school.
Yeah, I'm in school currently, and so is my brother.
There's so much that's going on because, and I know a lot of people don't talk about this, but at the same time, I'm going through a divorce. So I'm sitting here with his dad. We're going through the divorce trying to figure out stuff, and this hits. And I'm like, we got to get to the house. And so I call into work, and I'm like, look, I've got to go home. I just got a call. My van's going to stay at work, but I've got to go home. And it was like a 40-minute drive from High Point to Ramsor, and it was raining, and his dad's driving me home, and I'm going down 421, and I'm thinking, what is it? Is he dead? Is he hurt? What's going on? Didn't know. I had nothing to even call to say anything. And then I get another call, and they're asking me where Jacob's dad's at, and I'm like, I don't know. It's I don't know where his dad's at. And I remember.
Does he live somewhat locally?
Yeah, he lives.
Okay.
But at that time, it's like, I can't even remember what I'm doing, let alone know where he's at the time. And I remember hanging up the phone, calling my mom, who also worked in High Point. I said, something's happened to Jacob. I'm heading home. And when we get to the road that I live on, I lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. And, you have to drive down the driveway and up the hill. And as we're going down the drive and up the hill, I see the car. And it's just like, ooh, what is this? And, get there and I see this person stand up. It looks like he just kept rolling out of the car because he was so tall, and he, was dressed formally, and another Marine. And I start to buckle. And, I get into the house, and they sit down with us like at a table. And I just remember just like clawing at the table, waiting. Yeah. And he pulls out the telegram, and he says, "First, I want you to know he's not dead." And I was like, phew. So I'm thinking, oh, well, he's, got shot in the leg or something like that. And as they proceed to read the telegram, there's like at, 3:15 this afternoon, which I'm assuming was the day before because
it's ahead. Yeah.
And he says, Lance Corporal Levy received a gunshot wound to the head. And that was just like, I didn't know what to do. And I freaked. I just remember freaking out. And the CACO officer sitting here going, "Where are your other children?" And that's when the reality hit. I said, oh my gosh, they're at school.
Yeah, and that in itself was different. So I can only speak for like myself.
Hold on for a second. At that point, we didn't know. We knew what we had been told. But at the same time, it was like the news had already gotten word that a local Marine had been shot.
Yeah.
And I was telling the CACO, I said, someone's got to go get the boys. And so they called the school. His dad called the elementary school. The CACO officer called the high school. And that's when they pulled them to separate rooms. Because by the time they got to the school to get them, the news people were already there wanting to interview them.
Yeah. So with that,
it's ridiculous.
That's where so being that young, you getting put up to the office, like I said earlier. You think it's, you're in trouble when you get called to the front office.
Ooh.
Yeah, ooh. Yeah. Everybody was, back then, my friends were like, ooh, somebody's in trouble. And then the teacher gets off the phone and says, Elijah, grab your stuff. Now everybody's like looking around.
This isn't normal. Yeah.
Yeah, and I look at her and she's like, I don't know what's going on. It just sounded really frantic. You need to get your stuff. Go home. Don't worry about test or nothing. Just go home.
At this point, are you already starting to theorize, or are you still a little bit clueless?
So I'm clueless. Like,
Okay.
I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
I'm thinking, Mama got sick. My brother Payne got hurt because he was wrestling and stuff. So
Gotcha.
I wasn't sure what was going on. The last thing I was thinking was my brother was hurt.
Gotcha.
Well,
okay.
My closest friend that I had in elementary school was my buddy Dion. He was sitting right next to me, and so was my buddy Hunter, and they were like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I'm like, "I don't know.
I don't know."
Yeah.
But they knew something was wrong because the teacher's never been that quiet with anybody before. And I grabbed my stuff, and the SRO meets me at the door. And the SRO actually knew the family. It was Officer Martin. And she was like, "Come on, lad, we're going to the front office." I said, "Okay." Went up there, and when I got there, Chris, which is my brother's biological father, was there. They didn't know who he was, obviously, but he grabbed my hoodie and threw it over my head and walked me out past the news crew.
Because the cameras were out there.
It was News 2 that was there.
Yeah.
News 2, and they walked me out the door. Chris is holding my head down, walking me to his truck. And by the time I get in the truck and he gets in, they kind of, turn and realize, like, oh, that was him.
Yeah.
So he takes off down the road, got me, goes to the high school, picks my brother up, and does the same thing.
And in the process at the high school, what they've done with Payne is they've called him into a room with the principal and everything. And the principal, we did give her permission to tell him that Jacob had been in an accident. And so he was just like, and again, they've got him, but you got the news media right there at the school where he talks to him. So they took him out a back way to get him home. And
I'm the only one who doesn't know anything.
yeah, he doesn't know. And when they get to the house, and of course, we're there and we're trying to tell him what's going on. And it's, as you've heard me say, Payne is the one, my emotions, mine, I'm going to deal with it this way. We're trying to get him to understand that, it's more or less, your brother's got a boo-boo. He'll be all right. He's in surgery. And Payne is already, he's already went from to the worst thing.
Yeah, and so
And
now
don't
at this
wanna
point,
talk
I know
about it.
it's not just a boo-boo.
And,
If Payne's losing every bit of mentality he has over a boo-boo at the time, that's a big boo-boo, Like,
Yeah.
there's something else going on that I'm not being told.
And, we're sitting there and they're telling us everything. And I'm like, so what am I doing? They're like, well, he's in surgery. And, your Keiko's going to be with you in and out. And, but our goal right now is to get you to Germany.
Oh,
He's
I was going to ask if he was in Longstrel yet.
He was at Kandahar in the surgery and stuff.
So he's in CAF.
Yeah.
They have not
Transported.
evacuated him out of theater into Germany yet.
Right.
Okay. Got it.
And I'm like, okay, I said, I don't have a passport. I had never been out of the country. So I was able to get a passport in 24 hours. So if they tell you,
They can do it.
Oh, they can do
They
it.
sure can.
And
Uncle Sam can move when he needs to.
and I'm like, well, how long are we talking about being there? And the exact words that came from the master sergeant was planned for 30 days. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I can't leave my home for 30 days. I can't leave
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm going through a divorce, and the last thing I was, not to be ugly, I wasn't going to leave them with their dad. So, all this is going through, and again, but I've got to do what I need to do as a mom. I got to get to my son. And that whole night, they'd given me the number to the Red Cross that I could call, and they'd give me updates.
Yep.
And, of course, I didn't sleep, I'm trying to do what I need to do, trying to figure out how in the world am I going to pack for 30 days in a country that in December. It's cold.
Cult.
Yeah. And I'm
It's cult.
this is just like crazy. And, his dad is trying to figure out, because he's got a passport, so they're like, well, we can go ahead and send him. And I'm like, no, I have to be there. You got all this range of emotions that's going on, and I'm looking at them going, I promise I'll bring him back. He's going to be okay. And, I fly to D.C. and they, get me on a plane and everything, and I will tell everybody, Hakuna Matata means the same thing in Spanish, English, and French, because that's all I watched going. And, during this flight, I'm not sleeping. I'm, thinking the worst. I can't make any calls because I'm on the plane. And I remember getting there to Lundstone, and they were telling me, go to the USO. I don't have anybody there, but I had to find, the goal was to find the USO, which would give me my Marines to get me where I need to get to.
This is a government aircraft?
Yes.
Okay, so you're not flying commercial.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
And, but I'm just like a fish out of water because I don't know what to do. And my mind is not where, it needs to be to focus.
It's understandable. Yeah.
And so when I find the USO, I tell them who I am, and the chaplain comes out. And I just remember the chaplain looking at me. He says, what was your last, report on your son? I said, well, the last report that I got before I left D.C. was they were having to run some other tests because he was struggling. But, I know. And the chaplain looked at me and said, well, what I need to tell you is the only thing keeping him alive is the machines right now. And I said, nope. I said, he knows Mama's coming. And I said, that's what's keeping him alive. It's not the machines. And he said, well, we're going to get you over there to the hospital. And at this point, I knew his dad was already there. And I got so tickled because we were in a little Ford Focus and driving on the Autobahn. And just like, so I was like, oh my gosh.
You're a speed bump.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's,
yep.
And we get to the hospital, and I remember walking into the hospital, and it's just, they're telling, the staff who I am, and they're getting the doctors, and they're like, well, let's go over here. I said, no, I don't want to talk to anybody or anything. Get me to my son. And his dad comes out, and he's like, it's not as bad as you think, or, he doesn't look bad. And I, like, whatever. And I just remember walking down this hallway, and you're looking in these other rooms of, service people, half their bodies are gone. And I'm like, I'm not ready for this. What am I walking into? He sustained a gunshot wound to the head. It's half his face gone. Everything, the thought process is just
catastrophizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was at the end of the hall in the last room, just straight down. And when they opened the door, all he's got's a bandage on his head, just perfect bandage. I can still see his face. It's not swollen or anything, and he's just, and he's got all these machines hooked up to him, and I'm like, I'm trying to figure out a way to pick him up and hold him, and the reality was like, whew, he's not like the other ones down the hallway. And so, the doctor comes in, and we're talking about stuff, and he says, the first thing I need to tell you is he had a DNR. And I said, excuse me? He said, he should have never been here anyway. He said, but they did not see or know about the DNR in Kandahar.
Do not resuscitate. Yeah.
And he said, and once he got here and we realized it, and we knew you were en route, he said,
what can we do?
He said, I couldn't disconnect.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I thank you for that. And then they wanted to sit down and talk to him, and they said, all the tests that we've done, he said he was doing great, but then we really don't know what happened. It was just like he went into some type of not even cardiac arrest, but we could not get him back. So he said the machines, they're breathing for him. It's keeping his heart going. And it's a decision you have to make. And he says, but the other thing I want you to know is after we've been through his chart, he's also an organ donor. And this is our window, what we can and cannot do. But now it's up to you. And I'm just like, first, that's not what I wanted to come in and you start telling me those are decisions I've got to make, and now I've got a time frame because you got to get the organs to.
Yeah.
And his dad is standing there and we're talking. I was like, what do we do? And, a lot of reality was hitting me at once. Not just about my kid, but my personal life. Because as I said, there's a divorce going on. I'm sitting here with his dad, and his dad, when I'm asking, well, what are we going to do? And his dad's response was, you've got to make the decision. He said, because I didn't raise him. You raised him. He says, and I don't feel comfortable making that decision. So it's like, oh, now you want to say you don't want to say and stuff. It's like, and so all this reality is hitting me, and I'm thinking about, my religious background. Do I believe in organ donation? Do I, would I rather for them to transport him from here to Walter Reed and him be on, life support and see if he's going to come out of it? Because it only been a few years when that Senator Gabby had gotten shot in the head.
Gabby Giffords. Yep.
She was great, and I was like, well, where's that doctor? That's the doctor I want, And the doctor telling me the reality of how the bullet went in, and they still were not able to remove the bullet.
So it was still unlodged.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he said, literally, if you take a 50-50 chance, the way the bullet spiraled in, everything that was on his left side of his brain's now on his right, and how he would have to relearn stuff. And so I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about conversations that Jacob and I had. Mama, don't ever, let them put me on life support.
So you had
yes.
those discussions.
And Mama, you changed my diaper enough when I was little. I don't want you to have to do it. So don't, so these things are playing through my mind at the same time as a mom. No, I'd rather do that. I'd rather sit here and, this is what I do. I'm your mom. This is what I'm supposed to do regardless. There's hope. And I remember picking up my phone, and I called my mom, and I could hear my mom talking to him and, telling him he needed to come home. And he was a big, he loved Colt Ford, the singer, and Linkin Park. I don't know how the two of them mixed, but anyway, those were his, and powwow music. And, I was playing this music for him and stuff, and I said, well, I got one more call I need to make. And it was home to Payne and Elijah, and I called him. I said, hey, I'm in the room with your brother, and I'm doing some tests. I said, but why don't y'all talk to him? And the whole time I know what the outcomes get ready to be. And I could hear him on the other end, Elijah we got to do this.
I'll tell that part. So during that whole phone call, we were actually, me, my dad, and my brother Payne, we were going down the road and pulled over on the side of the road because dad saw Mom's name, and he was like, all right, well, I'm going to pull over real quick. Your mom's calling me, something about your brother. We're going to, talk to her. So pulled over, and he talked for a little bit and was like, hey, Jacob, you're strong. You've been through, worse injuries. You wrestled. You're tough. You're tough as nails. You're going to come home. You're going to go powwows. And just giving the words of affirmation and positivity to him. And then Payne, my brother, got to talk to him and said, man, when you come back, I could, me and you could do X, Y, Z together. Just do stuff like that. We all go out and do something. Because Payne was about to have prom too, I believe. And he was like, maybe I could use your car, just joking around with it. And then I got to talk to him. And at the time, my dad's got my brother's truck, which is a 72 Chevrolet, and talking about it, saying, we could all work on it all together, get it running for you and stuff like that. And then I told him, I was like, don't forget, you promised us that we would all go fishing when you got back home. And, I've already bought the worms. I got new fishing line. I'm ready to go whenever you get home. And then I was like, and we all said it on speakerphone. We said, we love you. We'll see you soon. And then that was the end of that phone call. And that was the week of the 7th through the 10th. And on the 10th, Mom called again and told us. We were actually at Nana's house, I believe. Yeah. And told everybody that Jacob has passed. And we're doing stuff there to get everything situated over here. And I didn't get to hear that part. I walked around the corner, and Payne kind of pushes by me and goes outside, and he just loses it.
Yeah.
And my dad looks at me, and he holds me, and he's like, Jacob has passed and has moved on. And I crumbled too. I cried. I tried to go out there to Payne. Payne, of course, needed his own time and space at that particular time. And so after Payne physically got it out, he came over to me, and we sat on the back porch at Nana's house and everything. And it was a very surreal and very intense moment between me and him, because now we are like, all we have is each other now.
Yeah.
And before it used to be all three of us, now it's just both of us.
Yeah.
And so, fast forward, I believe the funeral was on the 17th.
Hold on, because while they're doing all that, I'm over there making that final decision. And, I just remember looking at Jacob and saying, if you want me to stay, I'm good. We're not going anywhere. I'll be right here till we, we'll take you home. I said, but if you're ready, I said, me and your brothers are going to be fine. And it was like, as soon as I released that, I sat there and I literally watched water run from my son's eyes and heard the machine start slowing down. And I told the nurse, I said, get the doctor whatever we need to do. If he's an organ donor, let's do what we need to do. And if you've ever been in a situation like that, especially military, they come in and they do a ceremony in the hospital. And
there's lots of chaplains who exist to do this. Yes.
And it's one of those things, and as Elijah's referred to, surreal, when you hear them do a roll call of all the ones that's in there, and everyone answers up, and then they get to Jacob and they start calling his name. Of course, it's a long name, so they did it. And he never responds. But the whole time they're doing that, as a mom standing there, I'm just hoping he's going to move his hand and come out of it. And, he didn't. And it was just, now what do I do? How do I go home and face them? And we get there, I laugh about it now, because when we were flying back, one of the TCA guys was flirting with a girl at the thing. So we were trying to get to our next flight, which made us late to get to the next flight in Charlotte. And so when they closed the door, they wouldn't open the door to let us on to fly to Greensboro. And I got so mad. Jacob said, I was like, well, I'll take the later flight. I was like, I'm not taking a later flight. And I just started screaming, I get treated better in a foreign country than I do in my own homeland after what it's just coming out all of a sudden. And they're talking about, well, ma'am, if you don't calm down, we're going to call security. I'm like, call security? You just...
say when.
You just call them. And I've got these military guys that are there, and they're coming over, ma'am, what's wrong? And I'm telling them, and they're like, what do we need to do? We will get you to Greensboro. I'm like, I got to get home to my other boys. And their dad actually drove from Greensboro to Charlotte to get me, and we drove back home. And when I got home, walk into my mom's house, and First thing I see on the news is a picture of Jacob, and all I can think is they're going, this is why this child went into the military, because his mom's crazy. Look at how she acted at Charlotte Douglas Airport. But it wasn't that. But so I always joke.
Maybe it's a half truth.
I just tell people, I said, I think I'm on the do not fly list in, Charlotte. So I don't like flying out to Charlotte anytime I get. But, we come home, and again, it's this process of, getting, he's got to go to Dover. They're asking, well, do you want
I wanted to ask about the Dover. So are you getting into that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
But it was just, they're like, do you want to go to Dover? We can send you. And I'm like, no.
Okay.
Because I had two, it's like, to me, they were, well, you just got this carte blanche, you can go wherever you want to. No, I had things I needed to tend to at home. Yeah. And right now was the well-being of my other two boys.
Yep.
And I said, so we need to get things ready here. And, it is a process, because being Native, I had to have a particular ceremony for that. Marine Corps is going to do this. Then church, we're trying to finagle all this, and people are calling and asking questions. They're wanting to do interviews. And I'm like, I just want to bury my son. I don't want to talk to anybody. And, the news people can wait. And that's the way I was. I didn't want to talk to any news people. When we finally get everything lined up, and we're out at the airport, and he's coming in, and I'm looking at it, it's just like amazing, the people that were there to welcome him home. And we were told by the Guilford County Sheriff at the time, it was B.J. Barnes, that Jacob's procession from the airport was bigger than Obama's was.
So this is the regional airport there in Greensboro.
Yep.
So y'all chose to not go to Dover.
Right.
So, but it does happen whether you're there or not.
Right.
Okay, so you're receiving him there in Guilford County.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was like, wow. But I'm standing there, I'm just looking at all these people, and of course, Westboro Church wanted to show up and try and show out. So
they were still around at that point. Yeah.
Thankfully, again, the Patriot Guard riders and all them, they kept people at a distance.
Let's tell everybody who Westboro Baptist was, because there's going to be people who aren't listening. So, Dan, help me fill in some of the gaps. But the short version is, these are some lunatics in Central Florida somewhere who we'll call it rising a ruckus, or they would probably call it.
They are agitators.
Yes.
Yeah. Protest is the word they would use.
Yeah.
Yes. They are formed as a church.
Yeah.
There is nothing godly about them.
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit. But they enjoy showing up to military funerals in specific, and essentially celebrating the death of the service member,
Right.
Under the guise of free speech and protest.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
I have dealt with them personally, and thank God for some of our motorcycle club friends who will show up and
be the lead blockers.
Yes.
Is that a good analogy?
That's
a perfect analogy.
Yeah, so.
See, along with the Patriot Guard riders, we also had family in the Red Rum group that came and showed up, and they were like, no. They were like, let's not do that.
Well,
so
that,
I'm sorry you had to experience that, but I'm glad there were people there to.
I didn't even realize they were there until someone told me.
Shall we say be a buffer? Yeah. Okay.
And it was amazing, and I remember, just watching as we're going down the highway and stuff, how people were literally pulled over, and the law enforcement was standing saluting, and we used George Brother Funeral Home, and we get there, and I walk in, and the whole entire funeral home is dress blues and Navy guys in their dress whites. They're standing there lined up, letting us come in and as family do what we need to do. And I just, as a mom, I'm like, gosh, I thought I loved him. And I'm looking, and the guys that were with him, they're still over there.
In the fight.
They're still in the fight. But the guys that he served with in the 3/8, his first deployment, they're there.
They're there, yeah.
They literally were trained to do the honor guard instead of using the local reserves office up here. So they're there, and they are just like, Mom, we got you. And as I'm walking in, this one Marine comes walking towards me, and I literally fell to pieces. It was his recruiter. And of course, they removed the tear ducts of Marines at Paris Island. But this particular day, he comes walking up to me, and he's crying, and he's like, I promise. And as soon as he got that, I said, you promised to make a great Marine out of him. And you did. And to this day, whether it's an email or a text, his recruiter will send me something because he made a promise to Jacob to keep a check on me. And we're 14 years into this. And, I go in there and I'm seeing all these guys, and they're just, they're not, they're kids. And they're standing there trying to be, strong and upstanding and not, but at the same time, their brother, their friend is over there. And they've spent time with me, and it's like, they're family, and they want to cry, but they know they can't. And as a mom, I'm just wanting to hold on to them, because I feel if I hold on to them, I'm holding on to Jacob.
Yeah.
And
they're being who they need to be in that moment.
Right. And as a mom, you don't have to be that with me. It's okay, but they're doing their job. And we go through that, and as all this is taking place, I learned so much, because they're on guard, they're on duty the entire time. So 2 would be fully dressed, standing at the head and the foot of his casket at that funeral home, while the other one slept. The community was coming in and bringing meals for them guys to eat until we could, the funeral and everything took place. And I would laugh and joke with them. I said, yeah, y'all love them a lot more than I did, because I'm not sleeping in a funeral home with them. I'm sorry, but they did. And so I'm seeing, and I don't want to call it camaraderie. I'm seeing family.
Brotherhood.
And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, y'all were with him in the beginning. His other guys are over there. The captain that was in Afghanistan that was with him, his family was from Shreveport, Louisiana. Mm-hmm. He had written a letter, sent it to his parents in Louisiana, who then came to North Carolina to deliver that letter to me at the funeral home. Now, I don't know if that's happened with anybody else or any other branch, but I'm thinking he got a letter from thousands of miles to his parents to get to me in Greensboro from the time that they knew Jacob had died on December the 10th, and here we are on the 19th. And it was just this reality of, oh my gosh, what kind of impact did this goofy, nerdy, quiet little boy from Ramsor, North Carolina, he's impacted these guys, because, you've got family members you don't care that much about. But I'm talking about,
who you are.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
But I'm talking about, my son, this captain has only had him for 3 months. And you went through all that trouble to get a letter to his family. Unreal. And, it was just, everything was just so surreal. And, you go through the motions. We had the funeral coming out of the church and seeing the 2 fire trucks with the flag and everything. And all I could see was a sea of blue because of so many Marines. And I'm like, where are they coming
Came out
from?
Of the woodwork,
yeah,
huh?
where,
Yeah.
And it's just amazing at stuff. And I'm in the car, and Jacob, when he was in high school, when he didn't want to go to school, and I'd be on my way to work, he called, my car won't start, Mom, so I can't go to school. Okay, fine. No big deal. But then I found out later that what he was doing was actually going out and pulling a fuse out, and then he'd show that it couldn't start. Whatever. So
sounds like something you would have done, Dan.
yeah, we get. You probably did it, didn't you?
Hey, save gas in my own car.
That's right.
And so we get in the hearse and everything, get ready to go to the cemetery. Well, the hearse won't start. And
Weird.
we're like, what do you mean it won't start? It won't start. So they finally get it jumped off so we can get to the cemetery. And it's amazing. And I remember little things of going down the road and passing a horse pasture. And there's 4 horses. And as the hearse passes those 4 horses, every one of those horses bowed their head. It was just like, maybe I was crazy. I don't know. But it was...
It's God giving you a wink.
Right. And
He does that.
we get to the gravesite. He did not want to be buried in Arlington. He wanted to be buried at home. He said, because at least, we had these conversations. He said, that if I'm buried at home and they come to see me, they'll come to see you. He wanted to make sure I was okay, and I'm thankful for that. And, we did our traditional ceremony where our tribe did a traveling song. Of course, I had the Amazing Grace on the bagpipes. Taps is probably the hardest thing for me to ever listen to.
Understandable.
I mean, it is just... And then they did the salute, and regardless, it's going to happen, but I promise you, I jumped every time,
Everybody does.
And
yeah.
As we're finishing that up, they have some geese flying over, and it's so weird because they're flying in their V, one just the missing man, and so we're sitting there going, this is crazy, but we get through this, and the guys are at the house, and we're talking about it. I'm like, you're always welcome here anytime. You just let me know you're coming. And a couple of days later, I get a call from the funeral home. They said, we just wanted you to know what happened to the hearse. And I said, well, what was it? They said, it blew a fuse. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Jacob was just showing he wasn't ready to go. So that was his way of, his little sign. So we, all this is going on. It's Christmas.
Yeah.
Now, I had been off, and what was crazy, I had been off December the 6th from work and decided to start putting my Christmas stuff up. So I had the tree and the lights on the tree. We get the call on the 7th. Everything else is put to the side. It's done. So by the time everything's over, I'm sitting here, it's December 22nd. And I'm looking at the tree, and the only presents up under the tree are the 3 presents I had bought Jacob, which was he wanted the series of Son of Anarchy. He needed a shirt that said Sons of Anarchy. And I'm trying to think some type of book. But again,
Sons of Anarchy. No.
Probably.
Either that or beef jerky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're all, I still have them. They're all wrapped and put up. And I was like,
Do you get them out every Christmas?
Every Christmas, I'll get them out and look at them. I don't put them up on the tree anymore because I don't want people to think, she's really lost it. So I'll just look at them and I'll put them back. But one of the guys had called and said, hey, Mom, how's it going? I said, well, it's pretty rough. And they said, well, what are you doing for Christmas? I said, I'm not doing anything. And they said, well, what about Painting Elijah? You got all their Christmas done? I said, nope. I said, don't intend to do anything. I said, they're going to have to wait. His birthday's December the 27th.
Oh, you're one of those.
Yeah. So it's it's bad. I'm not even thinking about having a birthday party.
Yeah, I'll tell that story after she gets done.
And I'm like, well, I said, I'm just done. I said, I'm just going to be here. Well, the next morning there's 4 Marines at the door. Mom, what can they have? I said, I don't even know what they want. Probably the biggest mistake I ever made was letting Marines go out Christmas shopping.
I can see that.
They went, they did it. Here they come back. They got ghillie suits and that was probably their best Christmas they had was all the stuff they got. But
I made my own too with one of the Marines.
They did that, which was pretty cool. And so now one of our traditions is every year at Christmas, I put the tree up, I put the lights up. They come up, we finish decorating the rest of it, and they always have to bring an ornament. Jacob was a big Captain America and Tigger, and of course,
Tiggers are wonderful things.
Yeah. T-I-G-R-E-R. Yeah. So for a while there, that's all they would bring. So I've got an abundance of Tigger, Captain America, and Eagle Globe and Anchors.
It's an interesting combination, but okay.
Exactly.
I can dig it, yeah.
And, it got to the point in the house, I had 4 trees, big trees, that we were covering with ornaments because I'd get, every year just decorate it. So now we still get together every December during that week. We always take a week off from work. And my boss, Alan for Honor Brewing, he is always great. He has a house down at Kill Devil Hills, which is probably the best because that's how I can fit them all in one house. My house, they were literally outgrowing
Big party
my
house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we all come together and we have the one day that it's about Jacob. We do the toast, we do our thing, we get our cry out, and the rest of the time is enjoying each other and how our families have grown. And, they went from these, again, goofy, crazy 18, 19-year-old kids to they all got their full beards now, and,
Do they have white beards yet?
Some
Okay,
do.
yeah.
Shave their heads or whatever, and, I'm sure they can't fit into their dress blue uniforms anymore unless they have them altered, but, it's...
Even Marines grow up eventually?
Eventually.
Okay,
They're not
okay.
just...
I'll have to take your word for it.
Just a little bit. They haven't completely grown up. But to have them, the 3/8 and the 1/6 together, when they're together, Jacob's there.
Yeah.
And, we do it every year. This year will be 14 years. And I have to say, without them, I'd probably be in a padded cell. But then, as you've heard me mention, Honor Brewing, I met them a couple of years after Jacob had passed away. And it was their mission. They started out with wine. And I was a member of a wine club. Maybe I'd started drinking a little heavier after Jacob passed. But their wine label had a pair of combat boots on it. And the combat boots looked like they were all broken down and everything. And I reached out to him. I said, hey, I want to get a bottle of your wine because you've got my son's boots on your label. And they automatically went into this mode. No, it's not. We just had someone draw those on.
Please don't sue us.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Don't
no,
sue us.
that's not what I'm saying. Those boots remind me of what they looked like when he'd come home and kick them off all broken down from doing whatever he's doing. And they were like, all right. So we just kind of started talking about things. And their mission and purpose was to be able to take a great product and use that product to give back to military families that had paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I thought, hey, that's great. But I also, as an individual and as a mom, thinking, oh, now we got someone that's trying to make a buck off of, our military. So again, I just started talking to them and working with them, getting to know them, and I was like, this is pretty cool. I like this. And they were just starting out, so it was like, well, what can we do? How can we really do this? And I was like, oh, no. But one of the things I realized was I didn't know any Marines that was going to pay $50 for a bottle of wine. Because,
that demographic, I could see that.
Yeah. But it was great if you were going to have someone that was retired and give them a nice bottle of wine. And as we proceeded and they were trying to just get their feel of how they were going to do things, they decided to try beer, craft beer. And they did, and then that's when the whole idea came about. We can put the faces of the fallen on a can of beer. We just started just thinking with it. And at the same time, I'm like, but what's that got to do with me? Because here I am. I've been working with the state of North Carolina for 20 plus years, and I'm quitting. I'm going to go with this gentleman over here that just started with the wine business. It seems like he's doing great. So, I'm leaving.
People think you lost it.
Yeah. Because, again, she's done lost her son. She doesn't care. She's just throwing caution to the wind, and she knows nothing about beer.
Yeah.
And so we started all this stuff, and then what we realized when we would go and do events and talk about Honor Brewing and their mission, is I would tell Jacob's story. And that story started resonating with other family members. Like, oh my gosh, my son was the same age, or yes, this is why he became a Marine, or our mom reached out going, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I feel. And then, so people started contacting Alan and all them there. Well, what are y'all going to do? What can we do to help? What do you need? And so it's like, oh, great. Now what have we done? I started telling the story. Jacob's out, his name's out there. People want to know more. But that means there's got to be more. And we knew there were more people because of 9/11. But how do we reach these people? To me, it was an invasion of privacy if I saw on the news that someone had been killed in combat and I pick up the phone, hey, we want to put your husband's name on a can of beer. Because, again, the process is going to be the same thing that I thought. You're just trying to make a buck. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because, again, we are a business. We're not a nonprofit. It's a business. And so sitting back and thinking and processing things, again, people started reaching out. And so the concept became talk to these families, explain to them we're a business, but what we can do or what we want to do. So one of our first cans was the Faces of Honor. And that's where people had already submitted pictures, and we had, the pictures of the fallen on that can. So it was like, boom, it was a hit. And the beer was really good. And then the next thing was like, but how do we get the stories from this little tap room to out here? Because we hadn't, been distributed into any places. And so Alan and then was like, well, that's where you come in. I'm like, what do you mean I come in? He says, because I haven't lost someone. I don't know how to tell that story. People aren't going to talk to me as freely as they would you because you have walked in their shoes or you're walking in their shoes. And, that concept was like, oh, that's a great idea. But how was I going to do it mentally?
Yeah. Real quick, when you first went to go buy that bottle of Honor wine, it had been a couple of years since Jacob's passing. Where were you in your grieving process at that point? I'm not talking in like the 7 stages or anything like that, but I mean, in your own words, where were you in that?
I needed something to do. I needed to find something that I could work with that would make Jacob's death valid and meaningful. That I wasn't just, I'm a grieving mom, I've lost my son. I needed to be able to find someone that was just like me, because everybody's like, well, you need counseling. Well, my thing was, you find me a counselor that has lost their child in combat, XYZ, then I'll talk to them. But I can't go to someone that says, I can't imagine how that would feel.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm trying to figure out what to do with them because they're asking me questions. And the mom that I was no more. I was not, I'd go to work, I'd come home. Go to work, come home. And but I needed something. I was finding myself.
An outlet.
Yeah, I needed.
Find your why.
Yeah, the why, the purpose, Give me something that's going to tell me what happened to Jacob has a meaning to it.
And there was some times that she would come home and, in a sense, it would put a strain on the whole family dynamic of the house. So not only, my parents divorced and stuff, but as well as, like she said, she would come home and pretty much just go to bed. Or she would come home before any of us got off, of school or whatever. Dinner would be cooked, and then when we get home, she'd be in bed. And it was almost like a domino effect, because as the relationship between her and us kind of whittled down, it was also putting a strain between me and my brother Payne.
It was like a detachment, kind of
Yeah.
like with Jacob and Elijah back then. Now I've got a detachment. I don't, I can't fix y'all's hurt anymore. So
Yeah, and
something's
so,
wrong with me. I don't know how to fix it.
and with that, I'm now suffering twice of detachment, and then a third time with my other brothers. So first it was when my brother first came home, and then now my mom, and then now my other brother's pushing me away, and now I'm trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those where that the joke between the younger sibling always gets what they want, stuff like that.
I'm told that.
Yeah, and it's
I'm
like,
also the youngest.
yeah. So, well, in a sense, it's okay to be a joke, but then to live the complete opposite, it becomes so different. And like me and my brother Payne have always butted heads since our brother's death. We've been at each other's throats before. I mean, we've gotten into fights. He's called me names. I called him names. We've actually gotten into it before. And we've turned anger towards Mom. Mom's had anger towards us. And it felt like it was just this whole resentment towards one another. And we wasn't sure how to exactly bring it about to understand. And my birthday's December 27th. When I first had my birthday after everything, it was a couple weeks after we buried Jacob. I didn't want a birthday. I just turned 10. I don't want a birthday. And for me at that age, hitting double digits, I was like, I'm hitting double digits finally. And my big brother's not here.
Yeah.
So I didn't want a birthday. I didn't have a 16th birthday really, an 18th or a 21st, because it was milestones. There was things that he was missing that he wasn't going to be there for.
And everybody's on these emotional roller coasters. One could be over here, the other one's down here, one's right here, and nobody's talking to each other.
And and that's part of it. That is a whole different form of trauma for a kid. And there's stories that only people hear from Gold Star parents. They don't know how it feels to be a sibling and go through that dynamic. But they'll understand the concept of being a parent losing a child. But what about the siblings of that person who passed? Because there's so many stories of Gold Star families, but when you look at it, it's only the parents talking. It's not a matter of what the siblings went through.
And I think with them, they not only, like you said, they lost a brother, but they also lost a mom that they typically had.
And for me, because I can only speak for myself, it got to the point where, I would go out and I wouldn't come home until 4 o'clock in the morning, because I'd either be out drinking or, experimenting with weed.
Not at 10.
No. Of course, later on in life.
I mean, respect. Man.
Yeah, at 10 I was snooping it up, But during this whole time, you discussed during our break, relationships suffered. Not only in family, but the intimate relationships that I would have over time in school, dating, and things along that nature. And the reason it would suffer is because, of course, like the ones I explained to you earlier on break, they have their family. And I'm trying not to cry, but there was, senses of, they would say, well, I'm going to do this with my brother or sister. And I'm like, can I come? And they're like, well, it's just family day, whatever. And I'm like, I don't get that.
The reality as they got older was when they turned 21, because Jacob was 21 when he was killed.
Yeah, and that
both
was
of them reminded me, they said, we've lived, because his birthday was September 5th, so he died in December, so they would measure it. We've made it a day longer than Jacob lived. And, so those realities, but like you said, that part of my grief, I needed something. I had to find an outlet that when I went to work, every little corner I didn't see Jacob sitting in, but I felt the need to help somebody else. If I could get into somebody else's little situation, I didn't have to think about my situation.
Yeah.
So when Honor came along, again, it was like, well, I'm going to talk to these other families. That'll take me, I don't have to think about Jacob. But then in the reality, when I started talking to some of these families and they would tell their stories, it's like, whoa, that's, we did the same thing. Our son.
There's a lot of connectivity there.
Yes. And so I found that niche. And then with Honor and these families, we've been able to take those moments of, when the tears and stuff were such gut-wrenching and just like painful, to having some good times because of what we can do with the beer. And then you're finding out, well, this family, does a scholarship or does a run, and because their son was very involved in, the, what do you call it, the Future Farmers of America. That's what I was saying.
FFA.
Yeah, FFA. That's what I was trying to think, what was the initials. But, you find out that that's what that person was involved in, and through Honor, we could do an event and raise some money and say, here, it's in his memory. And it's kind of like what we do with at Jacob's High School. We have a scholarship, and people just knew I was going to have that scholarship set up for the football team. Jacob never played football. He wrestled, cross country, and was an ROTC. So the scholarship, we give out a scholarship. Past couple of years, we've split it. It's $1,000. We've split it $500 each to give to a senior cadet that's going to college or to the military. And that only came about because when he came home one week and he's like, Mom, I need like $700. I'm like, what do you need $700 for? You don't do anything. You got a car payment. You get paid, And when he broke it down to me, which was crazy, he said, Mom, they don't pay for our uniforms. What do you mean they don't pay for your uniforms? You work for them. And, and I'm thinking, he says, well, my dress blue jacket, and of course, going into the military, you don't get smaller, you get bigger. So
The one you get at basic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he needed a new jacket, and to have it tailored fit and everything, it was running about $750 to get,
Yep.
I was like, great. So
Yeah, with that scholarship, we've got to meet a lot of people, and one of them really hit close with me whenever I gave it out, because his name's Colt, and I'm going to show him this podcast, but he went to college, and he's also going to go military as well, and I done graduated at this point. I graduated with his sister, and we were trying to figure out, who to give the scholarship to.
they have to write an essay.
Yeah, they have to write a full essay.
Writing? Oh, no.
Yeah.
And I got to choose this year. I got to choose who got the scholarship. And first thing I did was I called my friend Jerry Lynn. I said, hey, I need you to keep a secret. Don't tell nobody. But I chose your brother to get my brother's scholarship. And she was like, oh my God, really? And I was like, yeah. And I can't remember if she just gave birth or she was currently pregnant at the time, but she was just overwhelmed and was like, this is so cool. I can't wait till he finds out. And he didn't find out till, right before graduation that I know of, that he was getting my brother's scholarship, and I was the one that presented it to him.
Nice.
And he, as far as I know, last time I saw him was a few months ago, and he's doing really well, and I still keep in touch with his family, of course, because they've always been real close to me, and they've helped me out a lot too, trying to figure things out. And throughout school, it's always been a good family. Her mom talks to Mom all the time. So.
And that's important. You want to know I'm very big. I want to know that they've used the scholarship that there's, and in our community, you can do that because we're always around each other. And what's kind of crazy, if you walk down the hallway at the high school, you got Jacob's picture over here, and some things about him. But when everything was going on with 9/11 and Flight 93 crashed, one of the flight attendants on Flight 93 also graduated from the school, Sandy Bradshaw. So their pictures are right across from each other. And I always stand there. Sometimes I'm like, 10 years difference.
Yeah.
And, Sandy graduated with my brother. So, our families just been intertwined.
Yeah.
For years. And so giving out a scholarship and being able to stay in touch with the kids or see them, oh, well, you did this, I'm glad you did that. My ultimate goal is we want to put it under the 501c through honor so I can give the scholarship out across the country and be able to give out, a $5,000 scholarship.
Yeah.
And build it, because that's what, as far as a legacy, like last year, when you think about 9/11, so kids the past couple of years and the future, they're going to receive a scholarship from, on behalf of Jacob, and they were not even thought of when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
So that's crazy when you think about that. And I emphasize that when I'm giving it out. Do you realize you're getting a scholarship for something, what you're getting it for, you weren't even thought of. Yeah. Mm. My son never knew you, but you walk past his picture every day in this hallway.
I'm kind of chuckling because I remember the first time I ran into a soldier that I talked to who had been born after 9/11. I was like, man, it's time to retire, man.
But those are like little things that catch up with you. You're like, oh my gosh, but it's.
I was born directly after it almost.
Yeah.
But it's, as a mom, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to make sure when they get that scholarship, they know that scholarship wasn't just someone reaching in their pocket and pulling out $1,000 and saying, here.
Yeah.
There was blood, sweat, and tears put into that scholarship for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and me and Dad built battlefield crosses also. So the full thing with it, and we even put it in a case that was made out of, I think, 2 or 3 artillery cases. And you open it and drop the bottom, and you can see the battlefield cross with the flag behind of it, my brother's dog tags hanging on it, and the branches on the military. And at the bottom is the Marine Corps. And they have it at the school. And actually, me and Dad's going to fix it up and bring it back to the school afterwards.
And I just, over the years, again, it's 14 years, we have seen a lot of stuff that's transpired, politically, culturally and stuff like that. And I remember when all the stuff started kind of like getting heated about races and stuff. And I told someone, I said, let me explain to you about the color of your skin. And I said, because when I went back to work after everything happened with Jacob, the hardest part I ever had to do working in the court system was wait on a customer that was from the Middle East. It did something to my core for them to come to that counter. Yeah. I would literally get up, walk away, somebody else would have to let them. And my supervisor told me, said, you've got to figure out how to get over. And I'm like, get over what? Do you realize that person that's at that counter, that one of their cousins was responsible for my son's death? I had some anger issues. But, when his buddies came back that following February after everything had happened, the guys from the 1-6, and we're there at Camp Lejeune, they're getting ready to do another memorial service. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at these individuals, and the first person that comes up to me, I literally thought it was Jacob because of the way he looked in his uniform. And I looked at his name, and his last name was Body. Which told me right then who and where he was from, even though he was in our military. And I was like, okay. So he comes up to me and he's telling me, he says, Jacob was my best friend. He said, I carried him. And I was like, oh. So now I'm like,
resemblance. The resemblance was like doppelganger almost, exact.
And so then I get a phone call while we're standing there, and it's the medic that worked on Jacob because they spun him around back because he was Navy and
Corpsman.
He's a corpsman. He's a corpsman.
Yeah.
Not medic.
And, well, you know.
Of course.
He was the corpsman, but every time I saw him, he was in a Marine uniform. So we're sitting there. He's talking to me and everything, and one of the other guys tells me, Doc Holland or Winston Holland, and they showed me a picture of him, so I'm like, great. Now it's this, we got a black guy. Well, then the guy that was in charge of Jacob's squad, he had lost both his legs 4 days after Jacob passed away, and so I didn't get to meet him, but I was talking to him on the phone, and I'm just putting all these dynamics together. So I tell people, once I finally met all these individuals face to face, first, you know, the corpsman, you know, I just wanted to hold his hands because I knew he had, you know, worked on Jacob, and I'm thinking, I'll put it in perspective for you. We had a Native American Marine that had been shot, was carried by a Muslim, worked on by a black corpsman, and they were all led by a white squad leader. I said, you know, the one thing they told me, it didn't matter because they were all the same colored dirt that Afghanistan had.
Yep.
And
Amen.
I said, they didn't care what their religious background was.
Yeah.
They knew enough that Jacob had to get home to his mama. And they worked together to get him home and get him on the chopper, get him out of there. And Buddy would, afterwards, he said, you know, when we couldn't talk and we had to send signals to each other, he said, I was always the Indian with the dot and Jacob was the Indian with the feather. So
That's not the first time I've heard that.
I've heard that one before.
They would be going,
I wasn't going to say it, but
you know, I was like, oh my God. So, you know, it's kind of like a running joke. But
Z was always the one that would make that comment, like.
But they did look so much alike,
Yeah,
and especially in uniform. And he wrote a beautiful poem. Him and Jacob had actually started writing something, and then he finished it off. So I'll send that to you so you can read it. But getting involved and meeting these families and being able, like I said, with the beer and doing these dog tags and things like that, just to see a family smile for a few minutes and laugh and be it, because we go through those moments where it's just like, you know, I tell people often, I wish I could go to sleep on September the 1st and not wake up until after my birthday, January 11th, because the holidays and everything, just don't want to deal with it. But as the years went on, because I've met other families, we have that connection, and we'll call and check on each other, and we'll find something to do, fun, to not be in the slumps. But you know, I have no regrets. I don't sit back and say, man, I wish I would have done X, Y, Z with Jacob. I regret things that, because of, like Elijah was saying, I'd come home, I'd go to bed, and I remember being in the bed one time, and Payne came in there and said, Mom, what's for dinner? And I was like, I don't care. There's plenty of stuff in there. Throw it in the microwave. Eat whatever you want. And the reality of him saying, no. You don't ever want your kids to tell you no. And so when he told me no, he said, you're my mom too. He said, I can't lose both of you. He said, you have to be my mom too.
That's powerful.
Very much so, because, you know, I was literally going to work and co-workers were, Mandy, you need to come to the bathroom. Let's get you straightened up because you cannot work with the public looking like that. And so I was literally had became this different person. So honor became the outlet. It was like, well, if I get involved with them, I'm going to focus on everybody else, because there's nobody that's, you know, can be worse than I was.
Yeah.
But when I got out there was people that had endured. I don't know what I would have done, like I was telling you earlier, if I would have just gotten a box of Jacob's things.
Yeah.
You know, because people, you know, the IEDs and stuff like that. But I got to hold my son for one last time. I got to hear his heartbeat for one last time. There are 7 people alive today because he did.
I wanted to ask about the organs. So are you in touch with any of those folks? Or
It pains me to say no, because since we were in Germany, the records are sealed. Now, if they wanted to reach out to me, I've signed a release that they can, but the hospital can't tell me who.
Understood.
I get a brief
it's
little
HIPAA rules and stuff. Yeah.
letter every once in a while, like at the time the lady was 42, she got his heart, and I got a letter a couple of years ago that she was doing well, she was enjoying her grandkids and stuff.
That's wonderful.
Gentlemen can see, and kids that had cystic fibrosis can breathe now because Jacob had 8% body fat at the time. I wish I only had 8% body fat,
Me
but
too.
he was in such good health and stuff that 7 people have benefited from, and they are living a good life. So I tell people, Jacob's really not dead. He's just in other parts of the
wonderful.
world. And I'm hopeful that one day someone's going to reach out and say, "Hey, you want to hear my heart? That's your son." But the reality of your kids saying things, and just as they say, I had to get up and put my big girl panties on and do the deed. And now I've met so many families and so many veterans. Even you go into a room, you can spot a Marine veteran out of it, just because of the way they carry themselves.
If you don't spot them, they'll let you know.
Real quick. And
military discount. No.
but it's just his buddies. When we get together in December, it's like they will tell me, we wait all year for this, just so we can have some sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
And those that have gotten married, for a while there, it was just, you can't bring your spouses, you can't bring your girlfriends, this is just us. And now they were like, well, what's going on there? What is she doing? Like, y'all hook up with other girls? And it's like, no, it's just,
it ain't got nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
But now some that have gotten married and their spouses came, it's like, let the guys do themselves. They're hanging out, and we'll just talk about things. And, we've got a huge, huge family now. My son, Payne, when he had his first child, his girlfriend at the time had been in labor for a long time, and I had been there the whole time, wiping her brow, getting him something, running back and forth. Well, it gets to the point where it's about time to push. And he turns and looks at me and goes, "Mom," I said, "Why?" He said, "I don't have anybody." "What do you mean you don't have anybody?" He said, "When Ava's born, who am I going to tell?" And I'm like, "What am I, chopped liver? I've been, I've been here through the whole pregnancy. I'm hearing it." But then it was like the reality. He was looking for his big brother. He had a little brother, but what's he going to understand about a baby being born? And I thought, great.
I was 14 at the time. What am I supposed to do?
What am I going to do? What is mom supposed to do? We got a baby that's getting ready to, and you're worried about someone being here. So I was able to pick up the phone, call a couple of guys. I said, "I don't care where you're at." I said, "But I'm saying in about the next 3 hours, one of y'all better be standing outside this door so this boy can tell somebody he got a nephew or niece or whatever." And it was amazing. She was born, everything. And when he went to walk out there, 2 of them had driven from Camp Lejeune and was standing out, and it literally looked like they had just ran in there. It was like, and he said, "How'd y'all get here?" And, so.
They're like, "Mom called."
But at that point, it didn't matter. He got what he needed, which was a big brother.
It's affirmation.
Yeah.
Mom was there.
Fraternal of.
He wasn't taking anything away from me, but he needed someone that had been connected with Jacob to be there. And so a lot of times when I sit back and I'm watching them and listening to them, it's like, well, I got a little part of Jacob. We're good. Or meeting with the families, I'm like, well, this is what I do. If you reach out, you get that little bit of your son, daughter, or husband, and that helped me. And so again, it's always a process. I'll have my days, and it's not the holidays that really bother me. What gets me is being in Walmart and hear someone pressing all the little tickle me Elmos or something, because that's exactly what Jacob would do. So when I hear all the little things going on, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, you fall apart, and people are like, are you okay? It's okay. It's Elmo. He's just, you know, you know, it's little things like that, or a smell, someone with a particular cologne or whatever, you know, you're like,
Smells are a big one. Yeah.
And so it's being a gold star. I mean, in school, you always want to get that gold star that you've done something great. You always want that gold star. But this is a star that I think I could have done without.
Yeah. Well, you're not the first person we've heard say that. So,
if you before we wrap this up, if you guys could give just one piece of simple advice to somebody that's at some point during their grieving process, not necessarily a Gold Star family member, maybe somebody, you know, lost a parent, lost a child, lost a sibling. If you could give them one piece of advice that you have learned in the last 14 years, what would it be?
I mean, honestly, there's not much I can really say except for, you know, try to stay as positive as you can with it, because it's not as bad as it looks at the end of the day. And there's a difference between happiness and joy. Happiness is a feeling that can go away. Joy is something that you have no matter what. So, and real quick, I can tell you, happiness, I could wake up mad, but I woke up, I'm breathing, I'm doing good. I'm joyful for that.
It's gratitude.
Yeah.
And my whole thing is, when you lose somebody, you don't lose them in a sense of never again. You lose them in a sense of in the physical. And there's always going to be a time where you're going to see him again. No doubt.
I would say breathe and make memories. Breathing, because, you know, it's, you got to have it. You got to, and it gives you a moment to kind of like, ooh, let's see where I go. And memories. Make the memories while you can. Every second, every minute is a moment to make memories. And as weird as it sounds to people, I'm still making memories with Jacob, because I'm telling his story. I'm getting together with people that know him, that are telling me stories that I didn't know. It's just like his buddies. They had him 3 months that I didn't. And every year I learn something probably I shouldn't learn, but it's okay. And he knows I can't get to him, but I have that thing. I'm going to get you. But make those memories and feel. Breathing, you know you're alive. Making the memories, you're going to remember stuff and enjoy, but you're going to do other things and feel it. Don't try not to feel it. And that's what I've learned.
Yeah,
because
numbness is the worst.
Yeah, I got that like you said, that numbness that I didn't care, but it didn't help me. But as long as I'm feeling, then I know that I've got a purpose. You know, someone needs me. I need to be doing something, you know, and there's a possibility. So breathing, making memories, and feeling. You've got it. To me, that's what you got to have. And, you know, and that's what I try to, you know, if you don't feel, then you're numb and you really don't know what life's about.
Yeah. Well, we honor y'all's sacrifice. Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing with us. Thank you for your son, both sons. And
is there, we'll put the link for Honor Brewing in the description and stuff. If people want to give to the scholarship, is there a website they can go to, a link or something like that?
It's Eastern Randolph High School in Ramseur, North Carolina. I'll get you that so you can link it up to where they can do donations. And through Honor Brewing, if, like I said, I'm on the website, you can reach out to me. If you've got a story of a veteran that you want to tell, let us know. We'll put it on our website. We if you've got an organization that you're honoring a loved one that's been killed in combat, first responder, let us know. Let us get together and see what we can do to help, do something for your organization.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Amanda, Elijah, thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate it.
And I've already been over on the west side of the river before. I don't like it.
I haven't been over there.
I've been shot at a whole lot over there.
Why?
Because they don't like us over there.
Why?
They're evil. Because they hate America.
But why? Want some water?
Yes. Thank you. This is for everybody that wants to look through one of our little scopes, or we call them sights. Here's a saw scope. I think I got this right. And it's like kill babies.
Go.
And shoot all the cute little billy goats because they are evil. They're Taliban too.
This dude down here, Motor City, the one throwing the baseball,
Yeah.
he's got a cannon for an arm.
Oh yeah, he throws it every day. Okay guys, signing off. What time is it here? It is 16:18 or 4:18 for y'all normal people. That means for y'all back at home, it's about
6 in the morning.
6:30 in the damn morning. So, see y'all in a few months. Bye.